So I think we can start. The people probably may join in later or in some minutes, but I think we can start because we have a very interesting session today. So first of all, good morning. Thank you very much for joining our Exceed talk of today. The topic we will face all together discussed with Professor Dirk Iffenthaler for the University of Mannheim is related to learning analytics for more responsive vet system. If you remember during our training program, training session, and previous Exceed talks under the framework of our Exceed project, we faced the topic of the relevance of skills intelligence system to increase the responsiveness, the readiness of the vet system and vet providers in order to face the challenge requested by the very let's say fast changes in the labor market. So when it comes to skills intelligence system, we cannot lose the piece of learning analytics to have a very complete and responsive skills ecosystem itself. So this is the reason why we will discuss together with Professor Iffenthaler of this topic. It is quite new, quite challenging for us, but I think very relevant to open our minds and to think also how to innovate our personal practices and way of working and approaches referring to our personal everyday work as vet professionals, so at micro level, but also when it comes to improve the activity and the overall responsiveness of the training offer at organizational level. So when it comes to refer to vet provider. And finally, last but not least, when we refer to our vet systems in terms of, as let's say, ecosystem of vet providers, vet professionals, policymakers supporting the overall innovation. So it's time to give the floor to our keynote speaker of today for more information about himself, first of all, and then to open the discussion, the presentation, the discussion about learning analytics. During the session, we will have some moments to reflect, to interact. So it will be concretely a talk together about learning analytics and their relevance for our work and activity. Please take your microphone off. If you have any question of any need of support, you can use the chat on the Q&A space according to your team settings. And in case of need, you can also raise your hand and open your microphone. The session will be recorded as always and published on the Exceed website for the ones not able to participate today and also for further, let's say, checking and reflection, personal reflection. So thank you very much once again for being here today, and I leave the floor to Professor Dirk Iffenthaler. Thank you very much, Professor, for being here today. I'm very glad that you, let's say, give your availability to participate in this session and to make us learn about learning analytics. Please, the floor is yours. Thank you very much once again.
Thank you very much for the invitation, Elena. It's fantastic to be here and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to see so many people in the room and yeah, looking forward to our discussion and conversation about learning analytics. I might share the screen and hopefully we can have a good interaction. I might not be able to see everybody because of the limitations of the screen, but we do our best to keep it as interactive as possible. So now you should be able to see hopefully the screen and everything.
Yes, yes.
Okay, perfect. So wonderful. That works now even better. I can also see some of the group at least. So that's nice for me now. Okay. Teams works better than expected. So
we are lucky today, let's say.
Yes, I'm lucky today. Who knows what happens tomorrow? So that's technology, and we're talking a little bit about technology today as well. So I titled the talk "Foundations of Learning Analytics," and we dive a little bit into the history of learning analytics, but also we dive into some future perspectives, especially for you for using this in the vet system in general, but looking also at different stakeholders. So as I've been already introduced, Dirk Giefenthaler is my name. I'm a department chair of economic and business education and a professor of learning design and technology at the University of Mannheim in Germany. That's southwest of Germany. I'm also a UNESCO co-chair on data science in higher education, learning and teaching at Curtin University in Western Australia, in Perth, located. So I have this two academic homes, and just to illustrate this a little bit, this is the Palace of Mannheim on the upper slide, where we have our university located in, and we are teaching our students and do our research in this palace. And below you see the beautiful campus of Bentley in Perth in Western Australia, where Curtin University is located, and my UNESCO chair is located, which is also a fantastic opportunity to bridge two academic homes on the one side, but also do all these analytics work on different grounds of maybe data protection, but also different grounds of institutional requirements. So I come to this in more detail later on. Learning analytics, what is it and where does it come from? That's the question we might get into as a first step. And I brought with you here a first system I've been using in the 1990s. That was my first attempt in learning analytics, I would say. So you see, this concept has not been named learning analytics, but it was existing already in the 1990s. So that's a screenshot from 1996. That's the BS.
Dirk, we can see only the first, let's say, still the first slide.
Oh no, really?
It's
Okay,
fine.
so Teams doesn't work as we expected. Okay, that's too bad. Sorry for that. So can we do this in a better way? Okay.
Now we see the third one and the second.
Now
the
we
second.
can see the University of Mannheim and the building you mentioned before. So the
Okay,
connection
yes,
between
yes.
Europe and Australia. Okay.
And now and now can you see something else? No.
No, still the second slide.
Okay, so it doesn't work. I have to do it in a different way. Okay, sorry. So let's try this. Okay, again, Teams is not my friend again. Okay, now you can see the campus again, right?
Yes, correct.
And now you can see another screen?
No, still the second slide.
We see the presentation not in the presenter mode, so maybe
now
that's
we can
an
see
issue.
it.
Yeah,
I
started the presenter mode now, so you should see it now, but you can't see it, right?
We can see the third slide now.
Okay, but if I move forward, you cannot see the next slide.
No.
Okay, that's fantastic. Okay, how can we do it? Try another attempt. I share the whole screen. This is a mess. Okay, now you should see the whole screen eventually. Does that work now again?
Yes, full screen with the third slide. Now the first slide. Now it's working.
Now it's working? Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay. So sorry for this. It's
no problem. No problem.
So, but now
everything is fine.
Okay, great. So just to illustrate the pictures again, so you know where my academic homes are. Okay, so let's go back to where does it come from? Sorry. So this is the system in the 1990s, 1996. You can see here from the screenshot, and this was my first attempt to learning analytics, I would say. We didn't call it in those times learning analytics, but it was still a way of looking into data. And what the system was is a group sharing system for files. And this is what we introduced at the university I was working then to support our students to get access to files. We had before that copied and in folders in our library, and now we introduced this digital system. And as soon as we introduced the system, I was interested what happens in the database. And in the background of the database, I could dig into quite a good number of log files, which showed me how many students are accessing the files and at what times the students are accessing the files. And this is a very simplistic way of learning analytics, because we could see that if there is a lecture of 400 students, only 10 students have been accessing the files. So we could address this and what is the issue about it, and how can we, provide them better support in order to access the files, etc. So this was a first attempt towards learning analytics, and you can see this idea of getting data for informing learning and teaching has been, growing with the introduction of such systems. So a few years later, in 2001, I met Martin Dogiamos, who developed a Moodle system, this learning management system. And again, my idea was, okay, let's introduce Moodle into our university. And that's what we did. And you can see here Moodle version 1.02 in 2002. And again, I did the same approaches. So we implemented courses for our students, and eventually I digged into the database and tried to understand what happens in the database and how do our students interact. So I was able to see how many students access our system day by day, and what type of interactions they did with the features of the learning management system. For example, how many were accessing the forum, how many were, using the quizzes and our resources we provided, etc., etc. Also, do they access the system from inside the university campus or outside our IP address of the university? And of course, also I was able to model a first approach towards social interactions from forums. So that's the network graph you see on the right side, which kind of was a topic modeling approach I did with natural language processing, where I could get out key features of the discussions and then connect them in their strengths of connectedness within the text written in the forums. So this is what our generative AI tools are doing in a more elaborated way today. But as you see, this is over 20 years in the past. So that was quite highly sophisticated in those times. So again, it's an approach using data produced in digital systems related to education, and then making sense out of it for learning and teaching, because this information was very helpful to support our students during the semesters. Moving a little bit fast forward, 10 years later, I saw myself in Australia working at Open Universities Australia. And this was the time where learning analytics then really started becoming a term in scientific community. We have seen the Learning Analytics and Knowledge conference being started around this time in 2011. We have seen the Solar Society of Learning Analytics Research being developed and founded. And we have, of course, in those times also the MOOCs, where lots of data in these systems have been produced, and the data was available for analysis and reflection. So what we did here at Open Universities Australia, which is a fully online university, we built dashboards for our students to better interact with the learning materials, but also have a better social interaction on the other side, and have a personalized experience in learning and recommendations how to move forward in the next steps of learning, being able to self-assess themselves and get dynamic, adaptive, I would say, recommendations towards their own needs. of the learning process. And as you can see here, this is all what Learning Analytics is about. It's about supporting learning and teaching processes and providing information in a meaningful way to the learners at a real-time state. So whenever the learner needs it, and not only when a teacher is available for or a tutor is available for supporting the learning process. This is implemented in a Moodle system as a dashboard, and we developed that, as I said before, for Open Universities Australia, where I was leading a research group on learning analytics. And this especially was interesting because the students never saw themselves in an in-person meeting, of course, because they were distributed all over Australia, but also beyond that as international students. This is the student dashboard. We also had a teacher dashboard, and we also had a learning designer dashboard. We come to this in a later stage. So you can see here, there's a lot of progression towards visualizing data, not only from the database, but also beyond that, in order to support these learning and teaching processes. And a little bit further on, this is the current system we are using at the University of Mannheim. I showed this a little bit in more detail later, but it also has a dashboard, which is GDPR, so General Data Protection Regulations of the European Union requirements confirm, and it provides a teacher dashboard and a student dashboard, and it showcases a lot of interaction possibilities, which I dive into later on. So that's more or less the history of learning analytics from my own experience, from my own perspective. And for today, I plan with you to look into three major topics. First of all, what is the state of research in the space of learning analytics? Because that's quite diverse and controversial in the conversation in the scientific community. I show you 4 types of implementation challenges we have to overcome when we start implementing learning analytics in VET systems, in higher education systems, in school systems. It doesn't really matter. These implementation challenges are always the same. And so I will address these with you. And lastly, we look into opportunities to moving forward and what are the requirements for a VET system to have learning analytics implemented. So that's the 3 parts. And as Elena said before, we will have some stop points where we also stop sharing the screen, and we have some discussion questions where we can interact and move forward. Please, just shout out loud because I cannot see you. If you have any questions in between, then I will be happy to take them as well as we go. So let's dive into part 1, state of research. And we can go back much more than I've been. So there's a paper from 1975, as you can see here in the citation. And this is coming from Collins, and Collins was proposing something very interesting. It was a computer-assisted instruction system, CAI. And this system was meant to have flexibility and skills of a human teacher. So really interacting with students from the idea that this competences of a teacher can be transferred into a machine. And this, of course, very much is focusing on interrelated network of facts and concepts. And if you think about AI systems today, the generative AI systems and all the conversation, how this can support learning and teaching, this is going back really much into this work as well. But interestingly, the system was meant to be programmed so its knowledge is as flexible as a human tutor would be interacting. So that's the assumption of real-time support into the learning process from this system. And I think this is one of the first publications which addressed the overall idea of learning analytics. And what is knowledge is something we would say this is the information the systems use from documents, from interaction points, from log files, and from other contexts which we can analyze in real time at the moment. So this is one of my favorite articles introducing the ideas of learning analytics. But yeah, moving fast forward again, really learning analytics emerged from the increasing possibilities for collecting and analyzing data from the education sector. And this increasing educational data mainly stemmed from the early 2010 years and onwards, of course, when we introduced these platforms for online learning environments, the MOOC platforms, massive open online courses, and beyond. And this has been influencing not only the vet sector, but very much the higher education sector, of course, also schools. And if you think about the COVID crisis, where we moved fully online into learning experiences, we had also big data collected throughout these periods. And yeah, but from this perspective, lots of computer scientists started to understand or try to understand what the data really means for education. So coming from other sectors like the finance sector, the marketing sector, where of course also data is being used for recommending sales products. You think about Amazon as an example, where if you buy one product, you get an information, hey, there's other customers who also bought such and such product because they also bought the product you're currently buying. So that's a recommendation, and based on historical data of previous customers. Think about Netflix or other streaming platforms, same thing, music streaming in Spotify, etc. It's the same thing, it's user-generated data, which is kind of analyzed, and this data is then recommended for the other group of users. So that's the overall holistic idea on using data in different applications, also in the finance sector, of course. And for education, it's the same thing. We look into a big data set and try to identify patterns which come out of the data set, and try to relate these patterns then to learning processes, learning outcomes, dispositions of learners, like emotions, motivation, and try to understand these correlations. And again, we are talking about the research state. This is one of the most problematic aspects in research around learning analytics. We have a lot of correlational studies in the last 10 years collected, but these correlational studies are, of course, very limited in perspective of generalizability. So we don't find too many studies, for example, which are experimental studies, longitudinal studies. That's still scarce in this field, despite learning analytics has been around for 15 years in the conversation in the scientific community. But going into some examples, this is one of the most common examples which have been discussed in learning analytics. It's about the frequency of use of systems and resources in online learning environments, and feeding that back into different stakeholder hands, meaning in teachers' hands or even in the government hands, and seeing how students or even other stakeholders are interacting with these systems. And then reflecting on the patterns of the interactions. As you can see here, this is on the x-axis, it's the weeks of the semester, and of the y-axis is the frequency of use. And then the different colors represent different features of a learning environment. And then you can see that there's different interactions happening with different features. And then we can learn, of course, as a learning designer, for example, what type of intervention we could bring into that. Maybe there's a higher interaction with a specific element of the learning environment, or how can we change the overall structure of the course in order to support the students. And the other side, we can also correlate, of course, these interaction types with the learning outcomes and see if there's any commonality between the learning outcome and the number of interactions. So that was kind of the studies we have seen beginning of the 2010 years into the 2015 or even 2020 years. So that has been very much researched. Under this umbrella, There was also the research around dropout analysis. So is there any pattern which identifies students dropping out of a course, of a program, even of an institution, of their learning outcome, or is there a pattern identifying students struggling, or is there a pattern of identifying students being successful? And so these were all the standard research questions, and they are still valid, of course. But there was kind of a realization that this is not the only way we should address learning analytics. Another example is this one. It's a discovery model approach. It's a self-organizing maps data science approach, more or less like you understand it, maybe a cluster analysis, and self-organizing maps have the same approach. On a big data set, you identify patterns, and these patterns have a flexibility, a fluidity in terms of the changes over time. So what you can see here is a data set of over 50,000 students being enrolled at Curtin University, and we identify different patterns of students which require different support when they enter our university. So we can clearly identify students based on their background information, on the demographic information, on their prior history of learning. So ATAR, that's the grade level they enter for higher education, for example, or other dispositions students bring in when they enroll into our university. We can clearly identify those students, what need they have or they might have based on the different patterns we can identify. So bringing them into a bridge course for language, for example, and supporting them in a introduction course to mathematics concepts, or helping them to have a social interaction with other students, providing them counseling support, etc., etc. So quite a few applications coming out of this analysis, and we are running this student discovery model semester by semester and identify possible support. And our support system is then that our student counselors contact our students directly. So there's no automated message going out, which is fatal, which doesn't work. That's also one of the research we found on learning analytics. It's a human support behind this information we get out of our data analytics. Another example is this one. We can identify pass and fail rates, as I said before, based on the background information of our students. And so this is a support vector machine approach. I dive deeper into the results later on. But there's different models, of course, providing us different insights. And you might relate this to a regression analysis. You can also create different predictors in a regression analysis, and that's the same thing here with a support vector machine approach, data analytics approach. But in comparison to regression analysis, we have a more advanced data set here. We have 1 million enrolled students in this data set, which is something you rarely find, of course, in education research, but this is something we have been able to collect and work with. And you can see there's different indicators which influence then, of course, the pass and fail rates of the students. And this helps us let's say on a political level, on a governance level, or on an institutional level, to understand what features really we need to focus on in order to support our students and avoid failure of students enrolled in our systems. And as you can imagine, in the VET system, there's many indicators being able to really provide this information in order to understand what we should do as an intervention in order to keep our learners on track. Another example, this study showcasing social interactions. I mentioned that before in the Moodle system. So it's really understanding how social interactions in discussions, in learning-based conversations are happening, and how these conversations can be supported in real time. Again, We need to understand when we introduce online discussions, how we can, facilitate these discussions so that they really have an effect on learning. And these research really focuses on these different interactions and centrality, for example, of networks, which you can see on the upper left side. So there's an instructor centrality. So the instructor is leading all the conversation. Everything is going back to the instructor, which might be not a perfect scenario because you want to have, students' own thoughts being developed and having a critical perspective rather than only focusing on what the instructor might want to hear. And so there needs to be different tasks and different designs of interventions in order to make this more student-centered conversations and having the instructor on the side. So depending on, of course, also the learning progression. So that's also an interesting approach, which can provide meaningful information into social interactions in general. Another application is this one. Don't be too much surprised about this. It's a network graph. I dive deeper into this in a minute. And a network graph shows the interactions of one individual unit of learning. And you can see what nodes, the nodes represent a feature of learning. It can be learning material, it can be discussion forum, it can be whatever you think of is introduced into learning. And it represents how students navigate from one feature to the other feature, for example. And this provides us on a high level information about the learning design of a unit, of an offering of learning. And we can dive into deeper, and 36 is, for example, one specific learning material. It's a video, and 38 and 37 is also a video, and you can see how the students are, moving from one video to the other video. If the sequence is the one you expect, from easy to moderate to hard, for example, or do the students, stop the video and move to something else like a document, which is a PDF file, which is the yellow circles, for example, etc., etc. Going to self-assessments, which is something like the green, and so on. And this really helps us to identify different pathways of students navigating in learning environments. And based on this, we can identify possible gaps in our instructional design. We can identify issues in our learning materials, and we can identify also where students might struggle with our learning offerings. And this analysis is quite meaningful because we can also combine this with success factors of students. For example, on the motivational side, on the emotional side, but also on the learning success, and provide then insights into patterns of students who might struggle and need specific interventions rather than other students who are quite successful, satisfied, and do not need these interventions. So we're talking about adaptivity here. So based on the different ways of student interactions, we can adapt the system towards the needs of the students. So everybody has its own experience, and this experience is quite fitting to the needs of the student at that moment of learning. And what you can see here, there's different pathways of different student cohorts, which have been successful or not successful. And for example, the left linear students have been following a pathway which was not that successful. They still passed the course, but were less successful because they were not interacting with all the needed materials, and so on and so on. And so we could bring in here a stop point, an intervention, a prompt, which would be then helping them to find also the other needed resources in order to understand a full holistic approach. So these are just some examples how LearningLytics is really supporting us, and we are diving deeper into the opportunities later on. But this should give you some first overview on what is possible and what is happening in this space of LearningLytics. But for now, LearningLytics has seen some quite, I would call it a little bit of diffusion of the meaning and of what really LearningLytics mean. And so there has been a research being done which all encompasses the idea of learning analytics. But we have seen also terms like academic analytics, assessment analytics, games analytics, and so on, retention analytics, school or teacher analytics, web analytics, yes. So there have been lots of terms more or less related to learning analytics, meaning more or less the same, but there was kind of a confusion of definition. I think this is true in many fields in the education and psychology research, but yeah, this has been very special over the last 10 years. We find this confusion of concepts, and I would like to bring in a definition for you for this talk, which might work for you all, related to the web sector as well. So in general, we already discussed the process of learning analytics. We need to access some data, which can be then transferred into information. So we make meaning out of the data in order to understand the concept and the context of it. We model the data then in order to have patterns being identified, specific aspects identified using machine learning approaches, data science approaches in most cases, because we have big data sets. And we validate, compute, or even predict then, of course, our analysis results, and then very much feeding that back into the learning process and the teaching processes for supporting, for optimizing. And that's an iterative process, as you can see here in this picture. So it's really moving onward and being real-time focused. And that leads us into a definition we created in the early 2010 years, and we have been able to publish this then later on in an encyclopedia on education technology. And there you have all the aspects which are still true in my understanding, which encompass learning analytics. On the one side, we have different types of data. We have static data and dynamic data about learners, learning environments, and the context, which is all important. So static would mean the data is not changing over time. So it's a set disposition of a person. For example, a learning strategy I'm using over and over again. So I'm a person organizing while learning. So this is my main strategy of learning. I might use other strategies, but this is kind of what I do. Or if you go into a psychology field, the intelligence quotient, IQ, is something which is static. It doesn't change over time. Maybe also your gender at some stage might not be changing over time. And that is also static. We have dynamic data, which is changing in different scopes of time. So it can be a very quick changing dynamic, which means that when I click something in a learning environment, all the clicks are, of course, changing the state of the current interaction. There might be also slower changes over time, which is an assessment result, which I take 3 times in a semester or in a school year. That might be also dynamic, but it's slower in its dynamic space. So you see there's different windows of changes happening in dynamic data as well, and we need to care for this in our analysis, of course. And we need to understand when we need to analyze the data in such a way. The data is, of course, about the learners, so the dispositions, so my background information, but also about my learning process and learning outcomes. The data is about the learning environments. So if we talk about formal learning environments, we have specific learning outcomes defined, and so as a benchmark, and we need to understand what these are. We have, of course, also the type of learning. Is it a team-based collaborative learning, or is it an individual learning process? We need to understand, is it more a guided training, or is it a discovery learning approach? Is it a conversational approach, or is it a structured learning process? Is it a game-based learning process? And of course, we need to understand the context. Is it a wet context in business, or is it a wet context in engineering, etc., etc.? So that's all highly important for us to understand in order to have most well, sound information in order to use them to analyze then our information. And best way would be real-time modeling, which means whenever there's changes happening, we take these changes into account in our modeling of the data with the goal to support learning processes. And that's the main focus, but also supporting then in a next level, improving the learning environments, what you have seen before, like understanding the interaction types and then changing materials, for example, in order to improve the learning in the end of the student, but also making educational decision on a institutional level or on a political level. So are there, redundant resources and do we need to allocate more resources? That might be all questions on the educational decision-making perspective. And in order to make this happen, this definition, we need a framework. And I would like to introduce a little bit this personalized adaptive study success framework, which can be nicely facilitated also in the VET system. And we all start with some formal requirements. And this is what we might call the curriculum. And this curriculum is defined, of course, by experts. It might be defined, of course, in specific areas in the VET system, also by government regulations, but also the institutions who provide the programs have, of course, their individual strategies, and the industry has some ideas towards the curriculum, and this is our formal setting. So this needs to exist. Otherwise, we cannot, adapt towards that curriculum, and that, of course, creates us always issues. And I take this a little bit before, but I come to this later. Not many learning analytics approaches really address this problem of having a formal requirement defined. So that's something, in my understanding, obvious, but we don't see that much in the learning analytics research. From this formal requirements, we have, of course, the learning environment, which includes all the information about our instructional and learning design. I think that's also obvious that we transfer our curriculum into a learning experience, and learners and teachers interact with this environment, and also, of course, with the regulations being related to it. And you can see here already all these arrows mean that's data streams flowing, and we collect data on all of these entities, and they have some interaction points. So it can influence, of course, what is in the learning environment, how learners interact, and the other way around. If learners want to change something in the learning environment, that also has an implications for the teachers' interactions, etc., etc. So you see, this gets quite complex, but that's what education is about, of course. And then next, we need to have all this data flowing into a learning analytics engine, which is then the background information we are collecting and making use out of it using algorithms, pattern predictions, validation, comparisons. All these algorithms should be able to access, of course, the data we have available and make some meaning out of it. And this can be then put into a report, so like a school year report, after a specific program report. And these reports can, of course, then inform, again, the education decision-making, our curriculum development, or even the teachers' self-reflection can be addressed here. But that's a summative perspective. So reports are static. Reports can be done, but they don't really have an effect on the direct learning process. That's why we need something like a personalization adaptation engine, which takes the results of our analytics and moves it into a pedagogical action. And this pedagogical action can be visualizations on dashboards, what I said before. We can use prompts or scaffolds or feedback mechanisms. We can include recommendations, or even there's research around gamification in learning analytics. So showing leaderboards and showing points and things like that, which might work on a short-term perspective, but not on a long-term perspective. And this pedagogical means move back into the learning environment, of course, to be meaningful for the learners, but also for the teachers. So that's closing the circle of this iterative process. But what we can see here from Learning-Lytics research is that this fully automated, and this is fully automated, coming from personalization adaptation engine into the learning environment, is not always working, because it might be too artificial. It might be not humanized in that sense that learners would accept that recommendation. So there's a better way to do it, and that's the red arrow you see here, which provides us with the data and the pedagogical means and intervention recommendations back to the teacher, and the teacher takes the action to inform then the learning environment, to inform the learner in an individual way. And that's what research is showing is more accepted than, of course, the fully automated way. There are some cases where fully automation is also working, like through prompts, but that's also very specific prompts which direct learners to a material, for example, or prompt them for a question before the video starts. That's something which is working, but not overall guidance, for example, for moving forward in the learning process. So the framework can be simple, more simple, as I show you here. And what we find here in the learning environment is not only a learning component, but also an assessment component, which we identified as very meaningful, because this is data we can collect from the learning process in real time whenever it's needed, and which brings us into a very much needed database of valid information about the learner's current state and where we can support the learner at the current state. So the assessment component has been very meaningful and on the foreground for Learning-Lytics research as well. So I've been talking a little bit now, and I want to address a first question to you. So I showed a question, and then I rather maybe close this screen and have the interaction with you. So how would you describe your objectives in keywords, or even in the chat? You can leave your ideas for Learning-Lytics in your organization, especially also, of course, in the web sector. What would you want to achieve with Learning-Lytics? So what are the objectives? So that would be my first discussion point for you. And of course, you can also now, maybe it's good time to have some questions towards that end as well.
Sorry, but the chat is not available.
Okay, so then
you can
maybe
open your microphone and make the question, Rossella, please.
Perfect.
Okay.
Have you a question?
No, I am thinking about the question.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I can start. For example, in my opinion, learning analytics, when it comes to think about improvement of training offer and training services, not only, let's say, support services to trainees and students and whatever. So learning analytics can be used for informed decision and also for needs analysis of our targets, but for tailoring supporting services connected to training offers, and also to personalize training initiatives. So the so-called individualization of learning approach.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, nice.
Even if we can have learning environments has training rooms, classrooms, so group of students in training, but let's say we can manage and we can make more aware and informed decision on what choices to be carried out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a lot of ideas already. So you have mentioned many different aspects on different levels, I would say. So starting from the learning journey, maybe understanding what would be the best offer for me for training. So there's a lot of programs I can choose from. So what is the best fitting offer for me? So that's one approach. I would call this a recommendation approach, based on background information, based on my prior trainings in VET. I can get a very specific recommendation, which I might not be easy to find, but the system can support me in this way. We have absolutely into this direction. We have research projects running currently, creating a recommendation systems in the VET field for helping people to find the best way of further education, for example. So that's fantastic. I also understand that personalizing training then, when you enter your program, we have also a project here, that you might already know something, but not everything about what you want to learn. And so if you have to go through all the content you already know, you get bored, you get, you stop maybe learning because you think it's wasted time. And so there's a possibility to understand what you already know and what you don't know. And based on this information, tailor the training to your needs only. That saves time. That helps, of course, in order to keep the interest up and motivated. And exactly this is also a project we are running at the moment. Then, of course, improvement of training services you mentioned, which is all the background information collecting and seeing if there's what I said before, redundancies, quality issues, quality assurance of programs. They can also be helpful on this level. So yes, I fully agree. These are all great ideas and absolutely great objectives. But I also want to address, it's not needed that you address all these objectives in one approach. Yes, so you can specialize your approach of learning analytics into one or others. You might hear others as well. So that's a little bit of my response to your comments. Anybody else with some ideas?
Yes. I apologize. I'm not a specialist of learning analytics, and so I would like to check if I have well understood your beautiful presentation so far. If I want to apply to learning analytics, a VET organization should have a learning management system. Is it right?
I would say it would be helpful, but it does not need to have it. It can be also other ways of data collection. So learning management systems have been used, of course, in the past very much as a standard and an easy way to collect data. But I must say the learning management systems also collect a lot of data which are not meaningful for learning analytics at all. So
okay.
So you can also use just, social media systems for conducting learning analytics, for example. There's also research around that, or other, self-tailored systems which you think are useful. But if you don't have, of course, digital data, you need to have strategies how you bring in the real-world interactions into digital data. Otherwise, you cannot analyze it, of course.
Okay. And so now I understand. The first step to apply to learning analytics is to have a clear framework that has to be designed by the institution and so on, in order to define the main fields that we want to analyze. Yeah.
Yes,
Is it
absolutely right. And
Okay.
I will also show you in the last part of this presentation today some ideas towards frameworks. We can make it very simple as a beginning, and then move into complexity. But it's like a change process for the VET organization as well, to understand what do we already have and what do we need to be successful, right?
Okay, thank you. It was very helpful.
Sure, welcome. Any other questions or comments to this? We dive deeper into it in a few minutes as well. So,
in my opinion, it could be very interesting to analyze the background of students,
yes,
also in relation to services that we can implement for better result in learning. I was thinking about, for example, students with I don't know in English, learning disabilities. In Italy, we have an increasing number of youngsters in vocational and training courses with some learning disabilities. So it could be interesting, for example, to analyze some data about the background, because in many cases are certificated this kind of disabilities. So we can have a trace of this, and to relate the background of students, looking also to this element, to the assessment at the end of the course, for example, or also for monitoring interaction of this kind of students. So to try to find better ways for personalized training paths for this kind of students. And I think it could be a useful thing, not only for a vet provider, but for a vet system. So, for example, a regional authority with collecting data from different provider can have a sort of analysis of this kind of relation. I don't know if it could be.
Yeah, I fully agree. So there's also quite a good number of research being conducted in the area of student background information within the learning analytics research field, and that these patterns coming out of student background information have been used to understand why students drop out of programs and systems, why they fail. And how they can best be supported based on their entry level, for example. Going back to my example of the Curtin University with the self-organizing maps, that's exactly the approach, right? So we look only on the background information of the students coming to the organization and then helping them in order to be mostly successful. And I agree on the disability aspect as well. We have just done a research study or finished it last year and now finished the analysis. We are ready to publish this work where we look into the affordances of students with learning disabilities towards learning analytics. And we clearly see a link between the support they would expect from organizations towards then what they would benefit from learning analytics. And there's a big tie between students really expecting learning analytics to helping them support in real time and whenever they need it. So there's a clear positive perspective to that. But also I want to address a little bit a limitation as well of data we have about our students. This can be also biased. This can be data which is not providing us a valid picture about the student. And that could lead into discrimination. So these biases can also be negatively, related to students' dispositions and can have a negative effect. So we need to always be aware of that. We need to understand data in the way, in the context data is being collected, and there might be some biases included as well. So not all data is valid, and not all data is meaningful for learning analytics analysis, and there might be some limitations here as well. I come to this later on, but yes, this is a very important aspect. And as you said, there's a growing number of students with learning needs, and we need to address this. And there's several solutions to that, but learning analytics can really have a possible impact here as well. Fantastic. Do we have one more question or comment? Otherwise, I would move forward. If not, if you agree, I have another interaction part just in a minute coming up. I want to dive a little bit deeper into this idea of what benefits come out of learning analytics. We already touched this, and so there is, and we touched this in several examples already. So benefits from learning analytics can be achieved from a summative. So the overall picture of a VET program, for example, of a training program, on a formative way. I talked about real time a lot already, so whenever it's needed, and predictive, like forecasting what happens in the future perspective. And this basically 3 perspectives can be used on different stakeholder levels. So we've been talking about the students already, we've been talking about teachers, trainers, we've been talking about learning designers, we've been talking about the organization, the institution, providing offerings and trainings, and we've been also touching already a little bit the governance side, so regulations, etc. So these might be different stakeholders, and you can see this is quite a complex situation we can create, and benefits come in all these different possible crossings. And this led us to creating this, I call it the benefits matrix. And what you can see here in each of the cell, you can imagine a benefit or several benefits. For example, the student in a summative perspective, or for the student in a real-time perspective, or for the student in a predictive perspective, and so on, for the teachers, for the learning designers, for the organization, for the governance. And you can now start filling these these cells with benefits. And that's also what we did in an expert research, and identifying with the experts in expert interviews what benefit could come out of all of these cells. And as you are experts in VET, I would like to see if you would be able to also again discuss the potential of learning analytics in these cells, and then look into possible examples and what it would be, of course, also for you as VET provider or for a trainer. Interesting. Would you rather go into the student level, or would you rather focus on the teacher side, and relate that also to your mentioned objective? So we talked about disability of students, so that would be clearly on the student side, or maybe also on the teacher side. And would it be a summative perspective, or would it be a more real-time perspective? Think about that, and we can discuss possible benefits. And after that, I will show you this, which is the fully fleshed out expert responses to different benefits as well. So yeah, I stopped this so I can see you again. And yeah, do you want to take some time and think about it, or shall we just go and start into the conversation about these benefits?
We can start, and then let's say while reflecting, we can start, in my opinion. So I have many questions, but okay, step by step. So my first impression is that this approach can help overall, let's say, this multi-phased concept of inclusiveness of education at various levels. Because if you know also, if you read some recommendation from the European Commission, or you found always, or let's say in reference documents of public administrations, you read often this concept of inclusion in education, or inclusivity. These aspects, we have been facing these aspects in our curricula redesign and brand new design, also under the framework of the EXCEED project. For example, when we focus on advanced manufacturing, and we very well know that it's there is a gender gap in the sector, and also in the VET education related to the sector.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, I think that this approach can support informed decision, because it's let's say data analytics support, I think, data driven strategies at different level, but with a perspective of improving services of any kind from one side in order to improve the condition of our students, direct beneficiaries. So when we talk about success rate, support, special needs, learning disabilities, overall, we think about the concept of how to make our services and our learning environments and policies, let's say, even if I'm not a policy maker, I'm a technician, but anyway, more inclusive. Okay, so this is, in my opinion, very much very much tied up to the concept of talent management. That is something we are facing as well, also starting in our region, Emilia-Romagna region, but across the ExCeed partnership. So learning analytics can help also in talent management strategies. That means, for example, understand better which are the needs of talent according to this inclusive approach for supporting services, personalized training services, career opportunities, etc. So this is my comment for that.
Yeah, I fully agree on this side, and so this also addresses many of the stakeholders you mentioned. So it can be organizations who provide trainings, and understanding, okay, what are the current talents on the market, and how can we react towards the needs of these talents to make them ready for moving forward and for a career progression. Or even also the government can use this information in order to provide further regulations for programs in support of organizations, etc. But also on the other side, we would be able to have trainers, teachers understanding what bring these talents into our learning and training environments, and how can we best address what they already know and have, and what are the needs of these talents. So I do fully agree. So this is something we can look into the summative, but also into predictive. So how do talents develop over time? So we can also analyze historical data and see what is the generation Z at the moment, looking into, and what would be, future perspectives. So that's also predictive ways of seeing learning analytics data. Yeah, but also diving deeper into then an actual learning offering. So a training provided, we can have these perspectives. So you see there's a micro level within the learning environment, there's a macro level, but there might be also a mega level on a whole wet system. So we have different layers of data as well put into this idea of these different stakeholders and the different analytics perspectives. So it gets more complex. It might be a cubus, right? So also having this macro, mega, even in between a meso level perspective as well. Any other thoughts? Concrete examples? Yes, there's a hand being raised.
It's not a concrete example, but what I am, my reflection is related to the great opportunity that learning analytics can give to vet providers to implement in a concrete way the European qualification framework.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, because we very often say that we will apply to this indicator or that indicator, but I am sure that vet provider don't have the right tools to give a concrete answer to this framework. And so the conclusion is that learning analytics could help to increase the quality of our training and our curricula, and give us the opportunity to monitor, to predict, as you explained us.
Yeah, very much. So can we really link the European qualification framework to training programs, and do they really fit together? So that's also something we can further analyze, and do all the materials we're using apply to the specific level we intend to, or are we overshooting, or are we underrepresenting the qualification framework? That might be also questions of curriculum design, right? And even that helps us in quality assurance, for example. And so that's fantastic ideas. And I think this is where the VET sector can really move forward and gain from data we have available. We just need to embrace and use for us. Yeah.
Just a comment regarding what Rossella was saying, because during our training program, let's say we organized some workshop on contextualization to the EXCEED project of the ECAVET principles or the ECAVET standards. So in my opinion, Rossella, this is also a way to ground these ECAVET principles.
Yeah.
Because when it comes to, let's say, the need of having KPIs for personalization, checking if everything is contextualized at the workplace. I'm referring also to the other participants present during the workshop we had in Oulu in February. Some of the partners were, and teachers and VET professionals were present. Also, the need of thinking about the continuous upskilling of trainers and teachers. So that is something that can be helpful in order to monitor everything and also to increase the capacity building of the system in terms of organizational system, I mean. Because otherwise these principles remain very, very theoretic in a sense, no? Or they seems very far from the real day-to-day activity in a VET provider or in a school, not only in VET providers or even at the university level. This is a general, in my opinion, phenomenon across the different education providers. So this might be helpful. Of course, it's very complex to be built, correct, Dirk? So I think it's a strategy in itself to design such a system.
Absolutely, yes. And I come to this in the third part of the presentation anyway. So moving forward and looking into how can we address all of this as a VET system, and how we can dive into this step by step as well. So that would be something we can discuss further on. Okay, so thanks for this. I want to open this a little bit, and I said this can be more complex if you look into macro perspectives. This is a mix of all the different levels. The experts were posed with the question, okay, if you want to support students with learning analytics on a summative way, what do you think would be something which could come out of this? And these examples in these cells, they just represent a collection of these expert responses. So if you dive into the student in a summative way, the students can understand their own learning habits based on the data we are collecting from them. And they can also compare learning pathways, so from the first training they did to the second training, how did they change and what does it have an effect on their own learning behavior, for example. They can also track progress towards their goals. What do you want to achieve after specific trainings, etc. But also in the real-time perspective, they can get support whenever they need it, and not only when a tutor or a teacher is available. And on the other side, also predictive perspective for students, for example, they can get adaptive recommendations towards achieving better in the end, right? So that's something. And we don't have time to go through all of this, but I'm sure you might be able to dive into this in a later stage, also address the publication, which I already referenced below as well. And then you might find for your own cases and objectives of learning analytics possible ways of how to interact. So we are still in the era of looking into research, and I want to come to some conclusions into research findings for this first part of our workshop today. So very early in the beginning of the conversation about learning analytics, this is one of the most prominent examples of the early stages of learning analytics research. This was Purdue Signals, which was a system implemented in Purdue University in the United States. And they were introducing just a traffic light system, a red, an orange, and a green, and identifying students who are progressing well over a semester, and saying, well, green is all good, you're good to go, you will be on track. Orange, hey, there needs to be some attention, and red, oh, there's real danger happening. And based on just these simple 3 color symbols in the learning system, they were able to increase the success rate of students, just making the students aware about their state of learning. It had the students gaining better final grades, but also gaining less dropouts. And that has been the prime example of learning analytics being very successful to enhance study success in higher education. We don't have that really much into the training and further education programs. We don't have that very much in the school system as well. So higher education has been the prime area of research focus and interest in learning analytics research. But also, and I addressed this a little bit before, learning analytics drifted then into an identity crisis, missing to advance robust empirical findings towards the high hopes of their benefits. So the benefits have been embraced and discussed, and they have been accepted, and based also on this benefits matrix I defined. But empirical evidence is not so much robust, and that's a little bit sad, I would say. Still, we are missing robust empirical findings, and I want to show this a little bit more in more detail. I've been looking into meta studies over the years, and starting at 2009. Why? Because 2009 was the year where learning analytics as a term was firstly seen in a publication. And then I've been diving into different meta studies, mostly systematic reviews, some meta-analysis or meta-scoping. And you can see here the progression of learning analytics research. First of all, there were data analytics approaches coming from computer science and using the data out of systems and trying to understand what best modeling approaches work best for educational data. For example, decision trees, or what I also mentioned, support vector machines, etc. And these studies were always comparing different approaches of modeling, what fits best for educational purposes. Then moving forward, we see studies in a meta-analysis looking at the effectiveness of learning process, and do really learning analytics support learning processes. And yes, there have been positive effects, effect sizes being demonstrated, being positive. If you move forward into the learning analytics research, we find that there were questions towards intervention and need for more interventions based on learning analytics. So mostly the research documented was a passive approach. So just visualizing data in dashboards, but not really addressing active learning. So it's this passive way was not found very successful. So needing more intervention to support active learning. Then further on, we find reviews looking into papers about dashboard design, and very much and clearly there's different design aspects into learning environments and how they can be utilizing learning analytics data. And yeah, the next research summaries, they show, first of all, insufficient study quality. I dive deeper into this in a minute. They were looking into dashboard design requirements. I also have that in the second part of our presentation today. Also, studies have been looking into social interaction opportunities coming out of research on learning analytics, and also have been always questioning the role of feedback based on learning analytics data as well. And all of these studies have found, critique, but also positive findings towards learning analytics really support learning. So I think that's the overall message of all studies, but with the limitations we need to address further. As you can see here, and I mentioned that before, there's also a conversation about data protection, ethical dimensions of learning analytics. So can we use all the data? Is this data discriminating in one sense or the other sense? That have been questions. Then, of course, also how can we further engage active learning and engage the learners for learning, of course, motivational perspectives. Then we discussed already inclusion, which has also been on the foreground of research. And lastly, and I dive deeper into this last paper as well, some current trends. So what have been the trends over the 15 years of research around learning analytics, and what are the major findings here? So two studies I want to address a little bit in more detail is the one regarding insufficient study quality, the other, the current trends. So first of all, this study has been funded by a German research foundation, and we collected over 6,000 studies around learning analytics over those years and looked into the study quality. And what we can find, and that's just an example of the studies included in our systematic analysis, was that the research rigor, the quality of the studies have been not so much in the favor of learning analytics research. So we need to address this a little bit in more detail. So we had experts rating the studies we selected and looking into research rigor, meaning what is the definition of learning analytics and the constructs being studied. What is the methodological approach? Is this a correlational study? Is this an experimental study, longitudinal study? Have there been interventions? Is this a sufficient sample size, etc., etc.? And we have been also looking into the data analysis, results, findings, and then, of course, also the quality of discussion and implications, contributions. And not many studies have been found as highly rigor in research. Most of them have been found as weak and moderate. And that's kind of a very worrying finding in my understanding, that these studies need to improve in quality. They need to improve in terms of operationalization of the study measures. They need to improve in terms of the interventions. They need to improve on the purpose and of course, also in the support. So you see there's lots of room for improvement from a research perspective, but still findings are there. Findings can be robust, but there's also limitations to these findings. And if we want to transfer this into now our implications for the VET sector, we need to address specific studies also in the VET sector for learning analytics, which we are missing quite a lot as well. So what is the overall, and that's the other study, what's the overall trends in learning analytics? And you can see here topic modeling over the years, the 15 years of learning analytics. And this study showcases what has been studied. And you can see here there's adoption on learning analytics in higher education. So we can transfer these ideas also to the VET sector, in my understanding, because that's quite obvious commonalities. But also there's differences which we need to address in a different way. Data mining approaches, which can be one-to-one moved into the VET system. What are the tools to design and support teachers? You can see there's skills assessment and program evaluation, which is very meaningful for the VET sector, in my understanding, but also then on the lower level, technology integration in general, so acceptance perspectives and other ways of doing research. So I think this is quite a helpful study as well to understand where we are at the moment with learning analytics and how can we learn from learning analytics in other ways. And I come to this in a minute in the second part of the presentation. So in summary, at the moment, the state of learning analytics research is we are at the awareness or experimentation phase in many areas of our education sectors. So in the school era, in the higher education era, we're a little bit more advanced. And in the web field, we are also kind of in the awareness phase, I would say. But we are not ready for implementation. We need to move forward with implementation. And that would be my second part, because the impact of learning analytics really starts with implementing learning analytics systems into the different stakeholders' needs and requirements. And that would be my second part of the talk today. I want to address 4 points with you, which are needed for having a successful implementation before we then move into the last part of today's presentation. And again, I have some interactions as well for you. So first of all, the first implementation challenge is that we need to establish learning analytics systems which cater for the interaction and the fragmentation of data, but also cater for contextual idiosyncrasies. What do I mean with that? Different data in our web system have different meaning, and they interact these data points. So we need to understand, are these interactions kind of changing the meaning of the data, and what we take out of this meaning for informing our learners, for informing our teachers, trainers, for informing our decision making. So we need to be aware of what data we have, what interaction points are existing, and how these complexities then can be interpreted. And that's the human side of learning analytics. So we need to have a good human understanding about what data means in order to make this informative for our web system. Secondly, fragmentation. We have data which is not fully fleshed out. We have data missing, and this missing data is quite a problem in analysis. So, and the more data points we miss, of course, the less valid our data analysis can be, and the less reliable, of course. So we need to understand how we create systems that collect the data we need, at least at minimum, to have a valid analysis. And lastly, I'm talking about contextual idiosyncrasies, which I come to an example in a minute. And this is something which is mostly common in all data analytics fields. But here in our education systems and in the web system, very much in the foreground. So one web approach or training program can be collecting data, and another program as well. And it can have totally different meaning, because the one would be coming out of the formal sales training program, and another one could come out of a financial, like a banking clerks or something. And that would have different meaning, even if it's same data points, because the context is different of these two different programs. And so you can see, you can get the idea. We need to have the context included in our data analysis as well. And that is what the human can bring into interpretation. So very much understand the challenges of data we have available and make use of this in a right way. And I bring in you an example here of a data analysis. So this is a data set of 1 million enrolled students in programs at 8 different institutions over time. And we have been using an algorithm we defined for learning analytics approaches in order to predict the pass and fail rates of the students when they enter the organization based on their demographic and socioeconomic background information. So all the institutions have been collecting the same data, and we've been collecting this entry data and used a predictive algorithm to say if these students might pass or fail the program they've been enrolled in. Not on their learning interactions, but only on their predispositions they bring into the organization. And what you can see here is the predictive accuracy, and that's quite good in general. So it's a support vector machine approach. It's a machine learning approach which helps us to predict these patterns and say, okay, this is a student failing or possibly passing the program at the end. And that's let's say, the predictive accuracy of our system, 81%, 76%, etc., which is quite good in general predictions. But what is highly important here is the contextual idiosyncrasies of these organizations. So we've been doing an analysis of the differences of the predictive accuracy of the same algorithm for all the different organizations, and we find significant differences between the organizations. So meaning that at organization 1, this works very well. So high predictive accuracy of 81%. For organization 6, significantly lower, meaning it still works well. It has already 76% of predictive accuracy, but significantly less than the first organization, meaning that there's idiosyncrasy in the context of the organization. One organization is a more social sciences oriented organization. The other organization is a more technical oriented organization. And you can see the same algorithm doesn't work in both contexts the same way. So that means that we need to have specific algorithms for specific VET organizations, for specific VET programs. So that's what I mean with idiosyncrasies of the context in our data. So data is specific to context, and we need to understand what best algorithm works in these different contexts. I have this illustrated also for the area of study, and you can see here again predictive accuracy, same algorithm based on the student profile, the background information of the student in different areas of study. And the same, we have a significant difference of these students enrolled in different programs. And in one program, we are better able to predict. In other programs, we are less able to predict. And again, there's significant differences here between the predictive accuracies. So very much important, data and their contexts need to be catered for as an implementation challenge. And of course, also the full fleshed out data sets we need, and no fragmentation is something we need to care of. And lastly, of course, the interaction of the data also needs to be set right in our understanding. Second implementation challenge is we need indicators. How can we collect the data we need and not other data we might not need? I mentioned that before. There's lots of data being collected in learning management systems we just don't need in our analysis. So it doesn't make sense to invest a lot of computational power, a lot of money in the end, and time and effort into analysis. Also looking into sustainability and our environment, that all costs, let's say, also something based on our environment, and we are not sustainable in that sense if we analyze all the data, and we might not need all this analysis. So keep it as sustainable as possible for our environment. It has an impact also. So what are the indicators? And there's quite good studies around indicators. We can look into affective indicators. We can look into metacognitive indicators. We can look into motivational and socio-cultural indicators. And so all these indicators, data points we know about learners, can have an influence on their learning outcome in the end. So the question is really, what do we want to support, and what indicators do we need for that support? Most of learning analytics research as an implementation challenge have been looking into available data coming out of learning management systems. And this is not the right way, because especially the curriculum side, and I mentioned that before in the framework perspective, we need to have a benchmark. And if you don't have a benchmark, we cannot see if there's a success towards a goal state. And that's missing in most of the learning analytics research. So we need to define specific indicators which help us to map learning progression and stakeholder needs in a better way. So I call this a implementation challenge towards the data-driven versus the data demand perspective. Data-driven is we have data, we use and utilize the data in order to inform our learning analytics approaches. That's one possible way, but it's a very easy and laid back way of doing this. The better way would be the data demand. We as web providers define what we need as data and then implement this data in our web systems in order to have a more meaningful and valid insight into the data points. And also only that data we need and not more we don't need and we have to care for and clean and, and have issues also with data interactions. So that's why we conducted research around what indicators could we need. And we've been looking into the learning needs context of the learning environment. And this study specifically looks into workplace learning environments, so really related to the web system. And we identified 228 indicators which have a significant influence on learning environments of workplace learning. So meaning that this set of indicators can be used in web systems to support the learning analytics approaches in these environments. And these are all significantly contributing to success of learning and process of learning. And I think this is a valuable work which point us to indicators we need rather than, so that's the data demand side, rather than just trying to utilize indicators we have at hand, but they might not have any impact. So this is all based on studies. And as you can see here, there's almost 30,000 studies we've been looking into and trying to make sense out of these studies for indicators. And we conducted another study with over 13,000 studies, again, looking into indicators focusing on the learning outcome. And again, we added 43 further indicators, helping us to understand what learning outcome needs are. Internal driven learning outcomes from talents, being successful, having motivation, interesting approaches, to external learning outcome needs, like a web organization needs to have a compliance qualification, for example, because the state is requiring something like that. So this spectrum also encompasses a lot of learning outcomes, and these indicators cater all for this. And these, again, are significantly contributing to the learning outcome. So this set of about 270 indicators can really help us to understand what we need for implementing these indicators into our web systems. And that brings me to the next conversation we can have about implementation challenges. We have two more, but this would be something we can talk about. So what would be measurable indicators for learning analytics? Focus on your own organization, on your systems, which are linked then, of course, also to the benefits identified previously in our conversation. I stop here for a minute again and see if there's any questions or ideas towards that end. One example could be the login frequency. Yes, so how many times do people log in into a learning environment? So that's very simplistic, but it can help us, to see if our learners are active or if they are just passive and just only enrolled and do nothing, right? Any ideas?
Maybe engagement indicator.
Mm-hmm.
So how long do they stay, frequency they log in, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So engagement is of course always a driver for learning success, and there's clear studies showing that the higher the engagement, the higher the learning success. I think that's obvious indicator, right? But we need to understand, is engagement really measured only by logging frequency and time, or is it by activities, right? So because I can log into a system and watch a YouTube video in parallel and do nothing, right, for learning, and still there's a high engagement score maybe on my side, but I haven't done anything for learning. So we need to differentiate also what learning and engagement really means, right? But yeah, I fully agree. Engagement is a very important topic. Other ideas?
frequency of students' interaction with deepening materials. So something that is extra. I think that if students go through these extra materials, let's say deepening materials, it's something showing their engagement. Of course, it's not necessary. It's not enough only download the file, because otherwise we have the problem you mentioned before. That, for example, if the platform gives evidence about interactions with these deepening materials, so exploration of videos, answers to questionnaires or tests, so something that shows concrete interaction, this can be supportive to understand if a course is considered a very interesting answer to students' expectations, if they are motivated to go on with the training, etc.
Yep. Yeah, I fully agree. Yep. Always with the limitation of the context, yes.
Perhaps also student assessment in relation to student background, study background, for analyzing, for example, personalization of training paths or other kind of, I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is, again, another important aspect. Personalization can be an outcome out of this. Yeah, fully agree. Yeah, fantastic. So if you go back to these publications, you can find all these indicators. So I can just have a brief overview on this today, but we could also dive. I have workshop components where we only work with these indicators, these 270 indicators, and really then define in a workshop character style what indicator could be used and how can you implement the indicator, because it's of course sometimes difficult to collect the data for specific indicators. For example, for motivational components, do self-reports work always, or how can we get information about your own motivation in order to start a program or during the program, and what to do with that data point about your self-reported emotion, etc., etc. So that's something which is important to understand as well. I think Elena has raised her hand again, right? Oh, we can't hear you.
You are muted, Elena.
Sorry, I missed to open the macro. So the question is related to work-based learning, because you mentioned before a set of indicators for that. And when it comes to this, they refer to VET education, always we have, let's say, the business education partnership are relevant, a key factor of the responsiveness of the curricula, of the training programs, and also of the VET ecosystem, because we continue, as VET provider, we must continuously dialogue with companies. Let's say, in this sense, some indicators are related to how much companies ask to the VET providers, let's say, professionalized trainees for internship or for possible placement. So can be an indicator of responsiveness of, let's say, training programs offered and delivered. Or availability of companies to share resources when it comes to refer, for example, to project-based or challenge-based learning opportunities. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. This can be additional levels of indicators, which are more, I think, on a summative level, or not so much changing over time. The indicators we identified here in this studies, they are very much at the heart of the learning process. So really understanding dispositions about students and their needs, right? And what is what is helping, and not so much on a, so really the micro level approach and not so much on a macro level approach. But we can, of course, advance this also on this provider and interaction of workplace, school collaborations. So this is a different perspective, I would say. But yeah, there are lots of indicators we can take into account here as well. All right, so let's move into the third challenge, which is for implementing learning analytics, we need to have some visualizations on the data we have. And this is mostly done by dashboards. So I think you are aware of different dashboards, so visualizations of data being put into a digital environment. And there can be, of course, different stakeholders addressed by these dashboards. They have different representations, of course. And there's research around dashboards, but the effect on learning and teaching is quite underrepresented in this research. It's more on acceptance and it's more on usability, but not so much on, is there really a direct effect of a dashboard design to learning and teaching? Again, this is something which is a research gap. But what we need to understand in order to have a good and solid implementation of learning analytics in our web systems. So you can see here some analysis. Again, this is coming from a study I mentioned earlier, a review study on empirical studies on learning analytics dashboards. And here you can see the different themes and what these dashboards try to accomplish. So, for example, a dashboard aiming to track competency development progress. So, do skills, change over time during the training program, directly applicable to our web programs. Emotions, that's something more complicated, I would say, but any dashboard which helps to track emotions by learning. So that could be just smile responses and positive, negative ratings, things like that, up to face recognition systems. So there's lots of things in this spectrum, and we could go through all of this, but there's also, of course, learning design dashboards. I mentioned them before at Open University of Australia. We developed one of these, and they track activities in course design process and help to improve the overall training program design, and help, of course, to overcome issues in learning design, and so on and so on. You can see there's lots of applications of dashboards. And the question here, again, as an implementation challenge is, what do we want to achieve with that dashboard? What do we want to have as a success factor? And that goes back again to our benefits matrix. So if we identify specific benefits we want to achieve, we identify different indicators which are needed for then the benefits to be achieved. And then we need to identify what type of dashboard do we need to create in order to visualize and support these benefits we want to achieve. So you see, that's the complexity of implementation challenge here. And but at the moment, and that's the realization of this study, and they've been looking at almost 500 papers being published around dashboards. There's a very primitive way of looking into these dashboards. So these dashboards mostly show bar graphs about login times and not much further. And that's, of course, a high limitation of these dashboards which are currently available. So not really what we want to achieve and what do we really expect from a benefits matrix perspective. So yeah, there's lots of room of improvement, especially also in the web system. I think we need to really understand what do we want from our dashboards and not just embrace a off-the-shelf dashboard which visualizes something which has no meaning in the end. So that's a big danger here. This study also did look into, what type of visualization they use, and as you can see, bar graphs are the most common used visualizations. Why? It's the most easiest way to do it. That's why it's implemented like this. And there's no detailed, rich information in dashboards, which are semantically rich. I showed you this example of the dashboard from Open University Australia from 2012. This is something which has been very rich in information, sometimes maybe overwhelming, but in the end, more informative than just a bar chart. Because research on dashboards shows that bar charts are hard to read by students and hard to then transfer into learning activities. So there's another study covering the landscape of visualizations and dashboards in a book we published in 2021 about dashboards. I bring that to the table later on. And interestingly, also, they have been looking into different benefits on dashboards and also different stakeholders. You can see here target users are instructors, learners, and so on, and they find different benefits. And what is also interesting, data. So that's our indicators. What is the data coming from and stemming from? And you can see here there's mostly log data, but also there's some performance data. There's also some academic record data, which is the enrollment data in the organization, and sometimes qualitative data, which might be also something like a self-report of a student. So different data points used in order to visualize them on dashboards as well. There's of course studies looking into direct effects or indirect effects of dashboards, and you can see here the visual attraction, which is on the upper left side, as a variable, has influences on the usability, the perceived usability of dashboards, but also on the understanding of the message the dashboards wants to transfer into learning, and of course then also into behavioral change, which is something like progressing in learning. So there's indirect effects of the visual attraction of the dashboard into the learning process. I think that's one of a very seldom study which looks into effects of success and in learning towards utilizing learning analytics dashboards. From this perspective, we can say yes. If we design the dashboards right, we have an impact on learning, which is of course a good message here. There's studies looking into the design components, and I think that's meaningful. If you start from scratch with the dashboard, what should you look into? Consider your end goal, benefits matrix again, and then of course going through all these circles. We don't have time to do this, but looking into what is the priority, what is the context, what is of course the design components, into keeping it simple as possible and using the right way of visualizing so that your learners really understand that as well, and keeping the language in the way the learners can utilize the information. There's ways of looking into what would you do as a task and how would you visualize it? So that's another study coming from the book I mentioned before. So if you want to show correlations, what would be the best visualization? So I think this research is also very helpful to understand the design and the components of design for dashboards. This goes on this list. What data do you have and how can you visualize this data in specific ways? Also very meaningful research. And again, a last example from this book. These colleagues have been going into the development and evaluation of student-facing dashboards with a gamification element, which is also relevant in my understanding for VET systems, and really showcasing different design examples which work best in the way of dashboard designs. Also, I think highly recommending these articles in this book. So that's published in 2021, as I said, still the state of the art of research, and that's I think a rich collection. It has over 400 pages with lots of international contribution towards dashboard designs and visualizations. So highly recommend this book if you want to dive deeper into this topic of implementation challenge. And I don't think that we have enough time for this, but this could be a good activity for your own organization to just take something like a blank page or something like this, a visualization of a screen, and then start scratching out your idea. And that's another workshop I'm providing often. Just scratching out a first idea about how a dashboard could look like, and then discuss step by step. What does it mean? How does it reflect to the learner's perspective or to the teacher's perspective? Is there a meaningful message out of these designs? And how can these designs be better supported? And on the other side, what data do we need for these designs in order to achieve the benefits again? So you see, there's always this logic behind my conversations. So keep that maybe as a task for your future ideas. But I want to come into the fourth and last implementation challenge, which is there's no organization-wide implementation of learning analytics. And why? It requires a lot of change processes, as you might have already understood so far. One of the most important challenges is the complexity of data structures in the organization. And if you have like a vet system, which is fed by many different organizations, it gets even more complex. So we need to have a data structure which is aligned around different institutions, for example, aligned around different organizational structures, aligned different programs. And this provides a lot of thinking and sketching from a data architecture perspective in order to make this work. And on the other side, we have all the learning requirements and of course also institutional regulations, which need to be embraced here as well. And this is something we started similar to a larger vet system in a country or in a state. We looked into different stakeholder needs of organizations and brought that together in this site. So we have different customer relation management systems, which encompass all the background information. We call this student profile. So that's the first data set to simplify the whole approach. Then we looked into the learning profiles, which are relevant to each individual program, to each individual organization. And we also look into the curriculum profile, which might be kind of standardized curricula in a state or standardized curricula in a vet system. And all of these three different profiles encompass data, which then can be analyzed in standardized ways. So standardizing data sets is the first way, and then bringing this into a data warehouse where all the data can be analyzed. And then moving this into dashboards, which is this box, the dashboard designs for the different stakeholders is the next step. And you see, it's a high complexity of implementing this then in an overall overarching system, but it's worth it in the end because it provides all the benefits. So we want to have for the different stakeholders. So yeah, this is the biggest implementation challenge, I would say. And I can showcase this on two examples. So this is from Curtin University, which I introduced before. And when we started this idea of learning analytics in 2015, we started with looking into what data do we have at the university. And I said it's a university about 50 to 60,000 students, fully fledged university with lots of study programs. So kind of similar to vet systems, I would say. And what you find here is we had over 30 databases with information which could be relevant. And they were all separated databases, not talking to each other, not being interacting. And the first step was, and that took 3 years, to bring this all into an enterprise data warehouse where all the possible reportings can happen. And of course, also the analytics can work. So as you can see, this has been a long journey and a long process, but in a meaningful way and in a whole institutional approach and not only in single initiatives, right? A second example is our LEAP system, and that brings, I think, everything to a simplistic perspective to the point. LEAP is Learning Analytics Profile, so moving learning forward. And we have this 3 profiles approach. So data is collected as static and dynamic indicators and data points. We have the student profiles where all the enrollment data is, for example, included. and the background information, and of course also the certificates being achieved over time. We have the learning profiles, which is the interaction with the learning environments, the training programs, and we have the curriculum profiles, which are, of course, the standardized learning outcomes expected from a specific training. And all this can be, of course, then analyzed and created into interventions and dashboards. And we took a participatory approach here. We ask, for example, students, but also teachers, what they would expect from a dashboard and how a dashboard should look like in order to have, meaningful approaches. And this research led us to a priority list of dashboard features. And these dashboard features as a priority have then been realized into the technological affordance of implementation. So what does it cost? What time and effort do we have to bring into in order to make this happen? And based on this, we created a priority list of implementation, step-by-step implementation of the learning analytics system. And this, resulted in this multi-step process of implementing learning analytics in the organization. So this is a way how you could go. And it helps us if we take this participatory approach that it's in the end accepted by the users. They get what they want and not something else they do not like to see in the end. So it has been developed just before the General Data Protection Regulations of the European Union was published. So we have been already taking this into account because we had access to the early reading version of the GDPR. And we have a core system where all data is anonymized and analyzed and then feed it back into the dashboards for the different stakeholders. So there's no personal information being used and analyzed in such a way that it can be identifiable. And that's what GDPR, of course, is expecting from us. So I don't go into this architecture in detail. I could talk about it if you like, but I think it's too much asking today. This is just a visualization of a dashboard of a teacher. And it showcases interaction points, and it showcases the need for feedback and the need for difficulty perception. So if students perceive the content of the lecture as easy or as hard, and if they need feedback, less feedback or much more feedback, and that helps the lecturer to identify where they need to change their current instructional approach and change the lectures, change their tasks, etc. They also can see the number of interactions of the students with the individual learning tasks and materials. So that's also helpful for them. So we have a three-layer approach of data protection and security. First of all, the university needs to bring in the lecturer as a learning analytics researcher and teacher. That requires a workshop the lecturer is going through. Then the lecturer can define in which course the learning analytics is activated or not activated. So it can be that I have 5 courses and only 1 course I activated. The other courses are not meaningful for learning analytics. That's why I'm not activating it. And on the third level, the student, so that's the student perspective, the student needs to activate, so opt into the learning analytics system. So as long as, and that's again European Data Protection Regulation, as long as the student is not actively saying, yes, I want to collect and analyze my data, then the data is not collected, which is, of course, again, privacy issues related to the students. So the students can decide whenever they want to let the data being tracked or not. So they can opt in and opt out whenever they want, but the state of beginning is always not being active. They can export the data, they can delete the data being collected about themselves. That's also General Data Protection Regulation conformity. That's just an insight into students' perspective. They can do a star rating, as I said before, regarding feedback and difficulty levels. They can create their own goals besides the learning goals of a unit. They can also create their own goals, what they want to achieve, and they keep individual for themselves, but they can track the progress over time with their own goals. Yeah, that's just showing the goals and the progress towards the goals they want to set themselves. We have also something like the Purdue system I mentioned before. So green is all good. I'm done, and these flags are okay. I need to do something here. So that's the signal system more or less adopted here as well. We have progress bars showcasing the activities, of course, at the lecturer side, and we have recommendation systems. Here, that's a literature recommendation, so the students can just enter some aspect, and then they get recommendations for journals, for example. So what would fit best for their needs and what journal they could look into. And this can also be done by the lecturer, defining different areas of interest of a lecture, for example, and then they get recommendations for the library in an automated way. So it's more or less the Netflix of academic journal papers. So we also have a prompting system where we can prompt to specific learning materials as an application. So that means that using this prompt, there's a screen overlay like this. So whenever I start a video, for example, I get this screen overlay and can start a survey, or I get a prompt which says, hey, when watching the video, think about an example, things like that, or take your attention to specific aspects of the video. So that's free to choose from the lecturer. And based on this, there's a higher interaction, active interaction being possible with the learning content. This can be adopted to the overall course whenever you enter the course, and it can be adopted to a specific entity feature, like a video or like a document. So when I download the document, there can be guiding questions for the document or something like that. And there's, of course, all the data collected in the background, and then the lecturer can get the information collected again in graphs and also in semantic rich information regarding different prompts. This is also implemented for exams. And within the exams, we get an overview on the learning objectives being achieved and not achieved, and again, the need for feedback and the difficulty ratings from the students, and how these different exams and tasks of the exams have been rated for future development of exams, but also for reflection on the quality of outcomes. And the students can also use this to relearn specific areas they might not have demonstrated well in the exams as well. So that's something we implemented for the overall exam perspectives. Yeah, it's highly complex, as you can see here, the architecture, and that's the last implementation challenge I wanted to point to you. So building these systems takes quite some time, and you need to have some good overall perspective and understanding of goals until you get and dive into this era. So let me go into the last part, and we can have an open discussion to close up today. So the last part, I brought in some recommendations for moving forward. First of all, I think we discussed today that the Learninglytics really provide lots of benefits, starting from individual support, looking into self-regulated understanding of your own learning needs, based on feedback and personalized and adaptive learning opportunities, which can be created from Learninglytics. On the other side, we need to be careful about Learninglytics because what data is really relevant for our pedagogical decisions. We need to understand the data protection, security in our systems, privacy issues which might raise from data collection, and of course also our ethical understanding. Why do we need this data, and how can we, inform our students in a valid way? And is this about our values, what we are doing, or is it just arbitrary data crunching? So that's things which can be negatively influencing also the acceptance of learning analytics. We need to understand that our systems are reliable and accurate, but also sustainable in an environmental perspective. So that's, I think, the major challenges related to learning analytics. And from that perspective, there stem some final aspects and thoughts in order to move forward with learning analytics in vet systems. First of all, we need to have a clear learning and data architecture. So the learning architecture I already discussed. So we need to clearly define what data points come from where, with which indicators, and for which benefits do we want to have this data collected. And if we don't have the data accessible, how can we access the data without harming data protection regulations? So that's the learning architecture on a system level. And we need to understand that we create our learning environments that they all encompass the meaningful information towards active learning. So clearly define intentions and criteria for success, clearly define learning tasks that elicit the learning process, provide feedback to that learning process, and empower learners in order to own their own learning process. Also have active social interactions and peer engagement, and helping to reflect on the outcomes. So really make transparent what is the process of learning. We need to understand different levels of our learning design. What are the tasks, and on what level do we want to address the tasks? We have been talking about the European qualifications framework, and this is exactly where this slide goes to. So we have different levels and different levels of learning outcomes and learning tasks, and they need to be clearly defined and accepted in the learning analytics space. When it comes to data architecture, we need to, and I put this all off here, we need to understand what the data we own and we have available means for us. We need to understand there's a lot of volume of data, and we need to keep this volume of data and try to analyze the data, of course, in a meaningful way. And not only keeping all the data, but thinking about storage, thinking about sustainable storage of data, and getting rid of data we don't need. So that also reduces the volume of data. We need to understand the velocity of data. That changes over time very quickly, and this change, especially in the development of data volume, has a high impact. There's a veracity of data need. So what is the quality and the preciseness of data we are collecting? Is the data we are collecting really representing motivation, or is it representing something else? This is something we need to address and keep the context in mind, what I addressed before. We need to think about the variety of data. So we have like structured data coming out of the log file systems, but we also have maybe text data, which is unstructured, which needs to be analyzed in a different way than the structured data. Variability, again, is there a change over time happening? So is it dynamic data, or is it static data? Is it kind of always stable over several years of interaction? And very much vet systems need to think about the value of the data they can utilize for themselves. So is it valuable for own, quality improvement? Is it valuable for creating better insights into the we talked about talents before, into partnerships? What can we take out of this data? And I addressed the visibility aspect very much. So if we build dashboards and visualize data, is it accessible for each and everybody? And on the other side, is there transparency towards where the data comes from for the visibility? So is it explainable? So that's something you also need to think about when embracing dashboards for data. And talking about biases, what we did before, this is great work by a colleague from the United States, Ryan Baker, who addressed biases coming out of data analytics. And here, and we don't go into all the details, you can see many different biases which stem from data analytics. And we all need to be aware of all these biases we might introduce with learning analytics and cater for possible outlets, how to embrace the biases and how to bring these biases into a positive meaning, or try to avoid these biases by other strategies. This is also very meaningful from a research perspective to understand the biases and then overcome, in the end, let's say, the biases. So learning designers in our VET systems need to be enabled to translate these pedagogical constructs they have in mind into data modalities on the one side, but so defining indicators, for example, but on the other side also knowing what data can be used for pedagogical means. So it's training the trainer, right? Perspective here. So data privacy and ethics, I already mentioned. So one important aspect is the concern over privacy we identified. Whenever we interact with data and data which comes from individuals, there's a concern over privacy. Do you want to, embrace the data collection, or do you want to have a distance towards any data being collected from yourself? So there's minimizing and maximizing factors towards the concern over privacy. And so a minimizing factor could be, I don't have concern over privacy if I know that the data is safe and is not being provided to third-party people and being used in other ways. So I think there's lots of commercial platforms which are utilizing data collected from customers and being sold to others, right? So that's a big concern over privacy, and that's a maximizing factor. So there's clearly aspects you need to identify and understand your learners and also teachers, what are their concerns, and then try to minimize these factors of concerns as much as possible. Otherwise, they do not opt in to data being collected, and that would mean that the systems are meaningless. And that's why we, as a second point, we need to talk about ethics of data. So what are our values and norms for learning and teaching and assessment? And there's an ethics of data, of course. So values and norms towards data. Why do we need data, and what are our norms behind the data? We need to have the ethics about algorithms. Who is creating the algorithm? Is there maybe a bias and an ethics issue behind the algorithm? Is the algorithm maybe discriminating specific groups of learners? That's what we want to avoid. If this is our value, of course, so that's another conversation needed to be done. And then there's much underrepresented ethics of pedagogy. So what is our pedagogical approach, and what are our values and norms behind our pedagogical approaches we are bringing into our training programs, and what does that mean for our VET system in general? So these are conversations we need to have at hand as well in order to make systems successful. And moving forward, there's a great vision here being postulated by a group of colleagues from Austria. They think about there needs to be something like an ethics officer who is caring for not only learning analytics data, but beyond that. It's again an example from higher education, but I think it can be transferred one-to-one to the VET system as well. So who is catering for ethics issues within VET systems if we are using data and learning analytics? And so what are the key requirements here? What do we need to understand? And what ethical issues could be coming from these implementation strategies? And how can we resolve these issues? So that's what a digital ethics officer could be catering for in our systems. And the third and the last one for today would be the learning analytics onboarding. We need to understand these implementation challenges, and I showed you 4 today, which require a digital transformation of our organizations, of our VET systems in general. So looking at optimizing processes, looking into learning opportunities for our stakeholders, and also promoting the data-driven learning culture. And this very much is at the heart of education data literacy. And this is coming from an EU project we have been running a few years ago, which defined and created a competence framework for educational data literacy for stakeholders in the educational field, and especially also in the VET system, but also in schools and higher education. And then this idea is that educational data literacy is a competence which supports ethically responsible collection, management, analysis, comprehension, interpretation, and application of data. And this is the, let's say, the competence set you need to bring in order to make things right with learning analytics. And this creates this implementation strategy from a readiness assessment, which you can do in your VET systems, asking what is the organizational readiness of the organization as policies, procedures, and practices are existing towards learning analytics. What is the technical readiness? Do we have our data warehouses, data collection points, system integrations, and sustainable solutions ready to go, or do we need to change something here? What is the staff readiness? Speaking about education data literacy, are they aware of that data management, analytics, learning design related to the data driven culture? And based on these readiness assessment points, there would be a layer of learning design supporting all the development of our future learning environments, and that could create a implementation strategy over the next few years, step by step, moving towards the benefits we defined in the benefits matrix. So that would be an implementation strategy I would recommend based on my experience in learning analytics and the many years I've been involved in this space. And then speaking about policy makers, I think this work points us to a UNESCO workshop outcome. So we've been discussing this in a group of experts with the Delphi study as well. And policymakers in VET systems specifically need to understand what's trustworthy, ethical quality assurance through mechanisms and standards, accreditation, for example, in our VET systems, and audits or recommendations into the use of specific systems in our VET environment. And of course, policymakers should help and be able to make and recommend standards and guiding principles and policies, of course, towards the implementation of learning analytics as well. And surely all our practitioners being involved in our VET systems, but also researchers interested in learning analytics might also promote learning analytics at this stage. So let me close with this. We still lack a rigorous empirical research finding, especially in the VET systems, in order to demonstrate effective learning analytics implementation. And I hope that EXCEED as a project consortium can move forward with that and help us also to provide more evidence into technological, pedagogical, administrative, or also policy needs towards learning analytics. And if you're more interested in this, there's quite a few books we published also in this space. And I can only recommend that you might look into these as more is coming. And there's also a call for a new book. We call it the Feedback Analytics in Education. And there's still time to write a proposal. And if you're interested in that, you can also contact me. And it would be great to also see some from the EXCEED project looking into a possibility here to publish. And there's a book series on analytics for learning and teaching. I'm also heading as a series editor. And if you have an idea for a whole book, maybe from the EXCEED consortium, might also be interesting. I'm happy to support this as well. And lastly, if you have journal articles, you might think about technology, knowledge, and learning. I'm the editor-in-chief for this journal since over 10 years, and being happy to also have a conversation about possible articles. And also, I'm a current editor-in-chief of Education, Technology, and Society, a fully open access journal, which you're also happy to submit your proposals to. That brings me to the end today, and we have still time to dig deeper into questions which might have opened up, and other ideas and challenges you might see for the future implementation of Learning-Lytics. For that, my slide deck is over, but yeah, I'm happy to continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, Dirk, for this informative session. I think we had an overview of what learning analytics how might be, and also its potential function when it comes to improve services, training programs, and also educational policies. That is quite a relevant aspect of our overall discussion in the EXCEED project. I think we can have some minutes for questions, curiosity, let's say, about what we have shared so far, or specific requests related to different contexts, thinking about, let's say, all the partner organizations connect today.
I talk too much. Sorry.
No, I think it's a very new topic, as I said at the very beginning when I contacted you. I think, let's say, as Rossella was saying before, the batch system is still very new with this topic. Of course, there might be differences across countries, across organizations.
Sure.
But generally speaking, let's say it's something that's both at an organizational level and also at system level. Let's say we can say there is still a lack of this data science approach to learning processes and learning environments, analysis, and whatever. So let's say I think that for a successful data analysis strategy, it is quite important, so essential to cooperate among organizations and policymakers. Because yes, you made some examples regarding universities, institutions, etc. And every organization can improve or develop its own learning analytics system. But
Exactly.
let's say to increase accessibility, to increase inclusiveness, to improve talent management strategies, whatever, thinking about a center of vocational excellence as EXCEED is, and the reflection of how to improve ecosystems, probably, let's say, a project focused on how to collect data from the different organizations, but also how to join somehow this data in a sort of local level might be useful for, let's say, measure the overall responsiveness of this VET system.
Absolutely.
Also referring to internationalization strategies of the VET system. We have best practices at country level, at organizational level, also Erasmus project, international projects, or while providers very strong in international mobility schemes, for example. But we have a lack, and putting together all the information of the data to have an overview. It's a question of systemic view of what we have. Everyone is very much focused on its own local environment or local sphere of intervention. And this is a limitation, in my opinion, besides the limits of the research in the fields, or, this is my personal opinion, of course, but it is the real challenge to make organization finding a way of dialoguing, exchanging data with a more local overview, let's say.
I think that's absolutely what I would also support, that we look into possible projects which really embrace the data, you know, and say how can institutions participate on a common data structure and get benefits out of it. So I fully agree on this. Yes, very much.
Yes, just to include another step forward, let's say within the Exceed project, we have also a dedicated process on self-reflection.
Yep.
So we called it a reflective path to excellence, because according to the recommendation of the European Commission, this Center of Vocational Excellence should develop their own model of excellence. What is excellence for each center? Reflecting on how to create connection to maximize this excellence in vocational education and training. So data analytics can be a way, let's say, to improve these overall strategies, maintaining this reflective approach from micro to meta level, as I think you try to share with us today. This is, let's say, one of the many takeaways I had from your session. So thanks a lot, really thanks a lot for today. But also policymakers might be included in the dialogue, in the discussion. Right. Also, regional public administrations, mostly thinking about, for example, Exceed partners, Italy, Spain, etc. So it's a multi-phased effort in order to put everything together. Yeah, but definitely it would be very, very, let's say, also a new perspective for this Center of Vocational Excellence. It might be also brought, let's say, at European level during an occasion of roundtables with the European Commission, etc. Right. So I will try to discuss the topic on the let's say, community of practice of all the COVES. We participated periodically as coordinators. This might be something to be considered, because the European Commission is not considering this approach at all when it comes to refer to Center of Vocational Excellence. So this might be something to be discussed also at the very high level, and not only at back providers level, let's say. Rossella, please.
Yes, I totally agree, Elena. And I would add that, yes, I agree, and you are right to discuss it at European level. But in our Exceed project, there is the need to reflect on this topic. Because it would be, as I said before, so useful at micro level, at micro level, at the level of a vet provider, and a vet provider in relation to our policymaker. So what I suggest is to organize a kind of learning analytics self-reflection in Exceed. And it could be, in my opinion, a very, very big added value to our project. And we often speak about there is not within vet provider, there is not so interest in new topics. In Exceed, we propose, we gave many input. This is a high level input, but it could be very useful to shift from a kind of local level mindset approach to something that help also to reach the main objective of our project. Internationalization, inclusivity, and so on.
Thank you. Thank you, Rossella. Yes, in my opinion, there are many complementary levels and activities we can carry out. For today, the main objective was to start to discuss about this new field, to create a knowledge baseline among us, and also to understand and, let's say, foreshadow further opportunities of integration, development, further discussion, etc. I think also the involvement of policymakers might be useful to understand how to go ahead beside, let's say, the technical dimension, but the COVE projects would like to create a bridge between the technical dimensions, so that organizations, and the policy makers of the governance level. So we will stay in contact for sure, also for further opportunities, workshop, in order to serve more in depth about regarding this topic that is not simple for newcomers, let's say.
Exactly.
Yeah, this is the truth. But in my opinion, under this project and under this upskilling program for that professionals, it was worthwhile to introduce it because, many further steps might be carried out in order, let's say, to improve our services, our readiness, our resilience. So all these concepts ask for, let's say, a more scientific approach also to our activity, our data, etc. So, any other comment or question before saying thank you very much to Dirk and close the session of today? It seems not.
Just a consideration about the volume of data. In one of your slides, you explained the different approach related to the use of learning analytics for, I remember, summative evaluation, real time, and predictive, if I remember well.
Yes.
And in my opinion, as a web provider, we can look at summative or real-time data if we are able to collect it, and it could make sense. But perhaps for a predictive approach, we need to look to a I don't know how to say. We need an ecosystem approach because our data are a few data, in my opinion, for predictive. So we need to analyze this new frontier together as a system. Regional system or national system, or for example international network system, for example the network of Exceed, because the risk is to have feedback not correct, in my opinion, if we have a few data. What do you think about this?
I fully agree on this side. So there's not always a need for having big data available. So for summative and real time, what you explained, there's small data which is absolutely fine to use, and there's no need for having big data collections and historical data, etc. So you can do real-time analytics on just small interaction points. And that's still meaningful for the active learning process. So that's the one side. But as you also rightly mentioned, if you go into a predictive and prescriptive level, you want to have big data points. Otherwise, the accuracy is, of course, too low. And that's introducing more biases than you want to have. So, and here I fully agree that you have like an overarching approach and ecosystem approach, which provides further insights into also the idiosyncrasies and the contextual aspects of data. And starting collecting historical data from now on could be one approach, of course, and then you will get eventually into a possibility to also have predictive analytics. But there is no need to have predictive analytics. So, for example, in our systems we rarely have predictive analytics. We mostly have real-time perspectives for supporting learning. That's also something which is, of course, the objective question we had in the beginning. So what do you want to achieve? Do you really want to predict, or do you want to, support in real time?
Okay, so thank you very much for your participation. Thank you very much, Dirk, for this informative session. If you would like to share with us your slides or some deepening material, it would be nice in order, let's say, also to stay on the topic also. In the next weeks. I think sharing these will be a good starting point to stay on the topic and to continue our discussion even at distance. And we'll definitely stay in contact for other opportunities, projects, discussions, etc. Because I think it would be worthwhile, let's say, to reflect more on the benefits of data analytics approach to learning processes and that ecosystems in general. Let's say we talk about let's say future trends moving forward from the state of the art. This can be a perspective to be considered within the VET systems, let's say.
Very much. Thank you very much. I appreciate your conversations, and it was a pleasure to be here.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
And have a nice day.
Thank you a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank
Enjoy
you.
the day.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.